turned down. That's fine. That's a good start. Okay. Are we on? Yes, we're on. Good. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Second Sunday Forum. It's good to see you here. It's an exciting time for the church. It's really great to have Thomas Gray here talking about the exciting solar energy project that the church is looking very hard at unrolling here in coming months. There's been a team of three of us, Skip Dunn, Galen Gisler, and myself, who've been working with Thomas for a few months on this, and it's moving along. There will be a proposal going to the church board this coming week. So keep your fingers crossed and your ears and eyes open. It's going to happen soon, we think. Thomas is from Positive Energy Solar, which is based out of Albuquerque and Santa Fe. They're now in their 25th year. They have done hundreds and hundreds of projects now around the state of New Mexico. I was impressed that they have 120 employees, over 120 employees, and that over 75 of them are employee owners. So they say that they put a lot of weight on both the planet, people, and profits, equal shares on all, which is a very nice philosophy, I think. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Thomas, and he'll tell us more about himself and the company and where we're moving on solar energy these days.
Thank you, Tyler. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Gray, and I'm happy to be here today and to talk with you about solar, myself, the national industry, and kind of where we're at. There's a good quote by Alexander L. that we put on a lot of our proposals because it kind of gives us an idea of kind of what our company mission is. The sun will rise and set regardless. What we choose to do with the light while it's up there is to us. Journey wisely. And of course, it's a nice view looking towards Los Alamos, which is kind of lovely, I believe. So I was told that the title of the presentation was Solar Energy Systems, National, Local, and on the Roof of this Church. So I ran with it. I think it's good. We've got an agenda. So we're going to introduce myself, give you a little bit of my background history, how I got into this. I'm going to give you a small overview of the current status of the solar industry on a national level, talk about what's happening here in the state of New Mexico currently, and then a proposal of what we have for you all and what we're looking at doing here. And then we'll leave some time for Q&A afterwards. So as I said, my name is Thomas Andrew Gray. I am in this picture. I am that guy. I was, this is my father, Sam, and my mother, Judy. I was born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You might have worked with my father at the lab, maybe not. I was named after this fellow on the left. His name was Thomas Andrew Gray. Tom Gray was a saloon owner, shown here in 1910 in Clayton, New Mexico. He was also the deputy sheriff, a cowboy, and operated a lumber yard. What we do for work has changed over the last century. My father was a computer programmer, back when computers took up large rooms. I myself, when it came time to fly the coop, I did. Seattle is only 1,400 miles away from home, so that worked out pretty good for me, and I chose to study art. And a little bit of philosophy. All paid jobs absorb and degrade the mind, Aristotle. That's a great thing to learn in college. Here's what he looks like. With art education, you come across various things. This is, a famous mural by Diego Rivera. This is in Detroit. And it gives you this sense of industry and design and history all kind of melded into the sort of thing. And it made for an interesting education. You start to see the world at large and sort of the power of what's going on. And it gave me some perspective to the size and diversity of the world, to the sheer and nearly endless expanse. gave me some pause of thought about the scale of things. The age of the universe is approximately 13.7 billion years old. There are probably more than 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. And the astronomers estimated that the observable universe contains 300 sextillion stars, which is, kind of a fascinating thing. But then when you look at our Earth, if you see how beautiful and attractive it is, it makes you wonder, what are you going to do for your work? What is your correct vocation? I think my father wanted me to study computer science. My retort to him was often about jobs as, I like the first one. I like work. It fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours. The last one seems more applicable to me in my life. People don't choose their careers. They are engulfed by them. John Dos Passos, he's a great author. The scope of work available to us is quite wide range in this world. This is a mine in Brazil. Here's some iron workers back in the day in New York City. Not a single safety strap among them. Coal miners. And if you look closely at the photograph, there are not very many old people in that photograph. There are a lot of young people. So what I came to is that found a quote from William James: do what you can with what seems to matter. And so going to school in Seattle, studying art, I end up getting a job with Dale Chihuly. This is a picture of me working on an object called the sun, and this is at the Salk Institute in La Jolla. Pretty interesting job to have if you're going to be an artist, to work for a glass artist who travel around the world installing large sculpture. So this is a project that I was both designer and project manager for, and installation guy. Part of the beauty of traveling the world is that you get to open up your eyes to things. This here is the private airport hangar for the Emir in Kuwait. Inside, so when you get off the plane, you have an indoor experience, which is this sort of glass dome thing, and there's a large chandelier that we put in that looks like a flower. As you enter the inside of the hangar, and this is like where the president would come in, right? There's a ceiling 80 feet high. On that ceiling was 500,000 LED lights trying to become like the expanse of the stars. And from there, we hung a dozen large chandeliers made out of blown glass. Now, while this experience was quite fascinating, I felt that I had to do more in my life. And here's again the Salk Institute, years after I was there, completely covered in solar. So that transition from doing good in terms of an aesthetic thing shifted towards what I found to be a correct vocation of trying to integrate myself into a changing world, to be part of a larger movement, a movement that would help the world, an industry that would hopefully change what we leave for the next generation. So when I got an offer from Positive Energy Solar, I took it. And I felt that we were, beginning to tip on the climate issues. Here's the industrial age emissions and projections, and if you see that sort of upward swing of what we're looking at, it's a challenge for us. I don't think that it might be swinging one way or the other, but I felt moved to put myself into the solar game. The CO2 emissions on a path to exceed 2 Celsius, and we're on that curve. So every bit that we do is important. And scientists are studying the oceans and the atmosphere and the ice and the trees and the weather patterns and more. But as I am only capable of so much, I chose the solar industry. So where we are today on the national level is that solar is booming business. Its market value is probably $33 billion. There's a number of solar businesses, over 10,000, so it's a growing industry. The solar price has declined 53% over the last 10 years, which is a good trend. So if you were an early adopter, thank you. If you haven't gone there yet, we can talk about that too. On this one, there's a couple stats that I find really incredible. One is that every 60 seconds in the year 2021, a solar system was installed. This is movement in the right direction. Not enough, but it's moving in the right direction. 33% average annual growth of the solar market over the past 10 years. So I've been in the business for 9.5, so I got in at the right time. And as Tyler noted, we're an employee-owned company, and I'll tell you that our internal shares have gone up nicely, but it's through the work of all the people. The other thing I found interesting about this stats was the state ranking by cumulative solar capacity. And you notice that New Mexico is nowhere near on that list. So I had to go find some stats that showed New Mexico somewhere up in there. And I found the state solar PV installation rankings. This is the first half of 2022. And lo and behold, we were 9th. So we're moving in the right direction. New Mexico has more solar irradiance than any other state besides Arizona. So you figure we would be able to do some pretty good work here. Now, to show you the bottom end of the scale, Alabama and the Dakotas and Alaska, not doing so hot. But where are we going? So here's the forecast, historical and forecast from 2010 to 2027. And if you notice, it sort of has a nice, sort of steady looking kind of graph to it coming, over the first number of years. There's a spike in 16. It starts climbing a little bit. It dips this year. And then it has a pretty steep sort of forecast. It's encouraging, right? But why is that? We look into this a little bit closer, and you'll notice that there's this green thing that says prior to the passage of the IRA. Now, the IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed. And so what happens here is that the government basically is making solar more possible. And if you notice that the utility scale on that, and utility scale is generally 5 megawatts or more, and in terms of scale, I have 8 kilowatts on my house, which is a good-sized house, good-sized system for a house. So you can see that what we're looking at from the industry is that we're really gearing up for some major change. And this really changes where we are in the world nationally. Starting on the residential side, if you look on the credit where we're starting in 2022 is at 26%, and this is a federal tax credit, going down next year to 22%, and then dropping to 0. With the IRA, this goes up to 30 for this year and stays 30% until 2032. That's a 10-year expansion on tax credits that's going to help support the residential market. On the commercial side, we are at 26% for this year, 22% the next year, and then we have carried out a 10% tax credit indefinitely. However, nonprofits, governments never got this because they don't pay taxes. So the big change on the IRA Act is that it's going to help nonprofits and governments by doing a direct pay. And they also included PTC, which is basically being paid for your production as opposed to getting a credit off your expense. So they're being creative in how they're trying to help you go solar, help pay for more solar. The commercial ITC under the IRA now is at 30 until 2033, provided that we haven't hit the target yet. And then they've added in other adders that could be gathered if you have American-made products, if you have scale wages and you meet a certain criteria of labor, etc. So the government has brought out big carrots, and they are dangling them for us to take. There's also additional provisions in this act, such as an additional $500 million for the Defense Production Act, which is good, so that we would like to have some manufacturing here in the States. There's spending money in all sorts of different programs, so they're going to try and work on energy efficiency, greenhouse reduction funds, really big business coming along, which I like because it indicates that they're looking at this from a multiple directional approach, not just single renewables, but more than just that. inclusive of the extension, expansion, and changes to electrical vehicle taxes, including new credit for purchasing used EVs, which is an important element. There's also incentives to building out the EV charging network. My favorite is, because I think it's going to help New Mexico a lot, is an additional $1 billion for the renewable energy grant called the REAP, and they've increased the amount that they would pay to a non-rural business up to 50%. I've worked on a couple of these projects, and it's fantastic because if you own a small business and you qualify, the government pays for 25% of your solar system. If you increase that to 50%, then you're really doing something positive. Now, on the local level, I'm hoping that you all heard that New Mexico passed a Community Solar Act. And the overall program initially is capped at 200 megawatts, with the maximum size of each project at 5 megawatts. And the intention with this is to spread the benefit of solar to low-income housing and other entities that either do not have the space, money, and/or infrastructure allowed to have solar. So they're going to basically you would be subscribing to a solar farm that may be elsewhere in the state. And so they will keep track of how much you subscribe to against your bill and subtract it out, which is a very clever thing to do. For New Mexico, it's also a good opportunity because it brings a lot more solar to the industry, which then supports our friends and families as well. This is going a little slow, I will admit. The utilities are not very happy about it. The PRC is pushing it along. The rules are going a little slow, but it's passed and we're moving forward with it. And, you know, the main thing about this is that they're going to really try it out, and they hope to expand the system. So we might be doing more community solar to try and help change how much our local production comes from solar. And that's a really enormous idea. And the program, it has a bunch of characteristics. Like the program must include a mandatory 30% capacity carve-out per project reserved for low-income people and related service organizations. This, to me, is really what the beauty of it is, that it touches community, not just those of us that can afford solar on ourselves, but our neighbors that can't. And at least 40% of the capacity has to be available in subscriptions of 25 kilowatts or less. So this is pushing it away from the big consumers like Facebook, Walmart, Target, or other big box stores that would save money by subscribing to such a thing as opposed to putting it on their roof. So where does that put us in terms of our presentation for you all today? Well, here we are. Recognize that roof? I don't know how often you look at Google Maps, but I spend a lot of time looking at roofs. And one of the things that I look for is their space. What does the solar access look like? I even got up on this roof, and I have a fancy little gizmo that measures how much sun access various points of the roof have. One, just to confirm that we're going to be okay in terms of what there is. So from this view, then, with the aid of looking at your electric bills, I calculated how many solar panels it would take to cover 100% of your annual consumption. And thankfully, there's more than ample room for this system. You'll notice that the orange areas are basically block-out areas. Those where you might have HVAC equipment, roof vents, or where you need walkways to be able to access stuff, because you need to be able to leave room for people to maintain those systems, as well as just make sure that the solar is looking good. So what we're proposing here for this building is a 30 kilowatt system, which is comprised of 62 SILFAB modules at 490 watts. When I started working in solar, the panels we were selling were about 300 watts. So there's been some incremental changes to how well the solar is being made. Also, physically, they were this tall when I started, and these modules are like, monsters up to here. Now, it's a roof-mounted system, which means that it's up on the roof, but it's ballasted. And ballasted, I have a picture of that, so I'll show that to you in a minute. But here's how the monthly estimated solar energy production versus your usage looks like. The blue bars, vertically, are what the church consumes in electricity. The orange then becomes the solar production per month. And so you'll see that we basically cover most months quite beautifully, and there's a few outliers. We're overproducing in a few months, but overall, numbers for numbers, we're at 101%, and that's in year one. That's a pretty nice sort of graph in terms of the balancing of the production, because we don't want to overspend on modules that are overproducing too much per month. So this feels like a good fit. And what this does for your bills, so if we, and you maybe can't see the numbers on the bottom, but I calculated out that your bills are about $5,700 a year. And if the solar system was fully paid off, your electric bills would be down to like $627, which is a good, good reduction in your rate. Not only does this help your bills, but there's also environmental impacts. Only one of these 5 options apply. Maybe the most important would be the 25 years of CO2 emissions reduction, and that's in pounds, of 1,592,000, which it's numbers like these that make me feel like I am in the correct vocation, or that a system would be the equivalent of 197 acres of trees being planted. It's not the only solution, but it's a good one. On the finances, we've estimated this system to cost around $86,000. Given the IRA Act, the church would receive a direct pay, which is basically cash back, a reimbursement of 30%. So that would be $25,000 plus. The estimated cumulative utility savings, we estimate over 25 years, would be $175,000. That's a fair amount of money that could be put in other programs to support other people, other situations. Here's a nice picture of what a ballasted system looks like. So your panels are at a 10-degree tilt facing south. There's ballast trays that have rubber pads on the bottom, so those sit on the roof. The solar module becomes its own frame, east to west, and they're all interconnected. So you're basically creating a large array that lowers the pounds per square foot on your roof. A low tilt also means that it's less likely to experience wind events or catastrophic failure. And it's also removable. It also does not penetrate your roof, which is one of the most important elements in any building, keeping your building weatherproof. And because of the change in the industry, we're proposing Silfab, which is a company, North American-made solar product. What happened in the last recent time with solar is we got stuck with large containers of solar panels sitting in the bay outside of California for months. So we're very happy to find a North American producer that won't have the same shipping issues. And they've been in business for 40 years, which in solar terms is a very long time. And they do all the right things, as many solar companies do. They recycle their stuff. They have a human rights code of conduct, and they're socially responsible. They have plants in Canada and the United States. So we feel like they're a good fit with us. And again, we are very experienced here in the state of New Mexico. We've been around since '97. We've worked for an awful lot of people here in the state and continue to do so. We're award-winning. You've probably seen our marketing. You've probably seen us around. But what I want to leave you with is kind of going back to the art in terms of vision, that we all must expand our vision of what's possible. This is, again, I was traveling the world for a number of years, so I got to go look at wonderful things. Imagination and drive and what you're aiming to do. This is buildings by Santiago Calatrava in Valencia, Spain, or just more simple visions of what people do, what your vision is of beauty to create a reflecting pool that's over 500 yards long. or how you remodel something like the Louvre in Paris, or the view from inside looking out. That if we can change how we look at things, maybe we can move forward. Again, a famous building in Seattle, one major problem with it, no solar. Why did it create such a beautiful building with so many facets of glass and different angles? Why didn't they make it solar? Lack of vision? Lack of technology? I don't know, but it should have been. Thank you. All right, what kind of questions you guys got for me? We can go back to what we're looking at up on the roof here.
I'll just speak loudly. Okay, good. Thanks. Good. Okay. So I noticed that you've got a small angle. Our solar has a steeper angle, and in some ways, I sometimes wish it were even steeper because snow has an enormous effect. Even a small amount of snow on my solar panel cuts the output. It creates a high resistance, and it cuts the output dramatically, even just a small amount of snow on the edge there. So anyway, I wonder about the angle.
That is a very good observation. I appreciate that. Our production estimates kind of take in the local weather effect. So we're very conservative in terms of those numbers. And yes, the snow does affect systems for a couple of days, as it melts. That's why there's some companies that do 5-degree tilt. In our experience, that 5 degree is way too low because it never melts. So we avoid the flat and 5-degree tilts, and we will focus on 10 and greater. That's been our experience. So we feel that we've covered the production estimates for that. And as a safety concern, I would tell you, never get up on your roof to go clean off the snow. These roofs, like these TPO roofs, far too slippery for any of us to get up there. So we let the sun do its work and get back to producing. But I do appreciate the comment. The engineering is one of the major concerns about going the higher tilt, because then you have to penetrate the roof, you have to then attach it to structure, and then we've possibly mitigated some production problems, but increased costs and time. Because if my ability to not cut through a roof, I can install much, much quicker.
In several places, both nationally and for the rating for the proposed system here, you have a rating, 30 kilowatts for this system. Is that the power that's produced at noon on a clear day, or is that averaged over day-night?
That is the DC rating of the panels in total. So, and to hit optimum would be like the perfect amount of irradiance at the perfect angle and the perfect ambient temperature, which, looking at data, I've never seen actually happen outside of a lab.
Thank you.
Hello? I want to give a preamble to my statement. It's not more of a discussion I'd like to engage in. I'm on the utility board, but I don't speak for the utility board. And I would like to compliment rooftop solar in the sense that we have a lot to thank to rooftop solar, because it's in the US, Germany, Japan, they've all had different programs that have, through the decades, really brought down the price. But I want to make a statement where I suspect the only thing I would disagree with, or I'd like to ask you to add to your talk, is that the economics are probably going to change, and I'd like to communicate why that is. One of the things that people don't, in my attitude towards rooftop solar, changed radically by being on the utility board. What I came to realize is that the current structure we have essentially has the poorer people in our community subsidizing the richer ones. And that usually gets people's attention, and they think, how could that possibly be? And so I'd like to explain the two reasons that is the case currently, and why it'll probably change. But it's not necessary to discourage it, but I think you should do a second economic calculation where I think we will go. So how could it be that we have a system now where the poor members of our community are subsidizing the richer ones? Okay, two reasons in the economics of our system. Right now, everyone in the community pays 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, so, and so of that 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour, actually, let me step back and think about this. If you have rooftop solar and you do just as you said and match the production on your roof to your yearly consumption, you don't pay for the grid. The way the economics are done, everyone pays a set fee, plus you pay 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour. By matching your load and your usage, the set amount you pay does not pay for the grid, it does pay for the utility board. So how do we pay for our grid? That's purely out of 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you match your load and your yearly usage, you don't pay anything. Okay, so if you're not paying for the grid, but you're using it, right? Because at night you expect to take power in, or cloudy days you're taking power in. Everyone, whether you have rooftop solar or not, you're using the grid. But only those that don't have rooftop solar are paying for it. So who in our community doesn't have rooftop solar? And that's where the equity comes in. People that live in apartments, people that can't drop down 20 or 30K very easily to put a rooftop solar system on your house, might not have good credit or whatever, but it's generally the people with rooftop solar in our community, on average, are the richer people in our community, and that's where part of the inequity comes in. There's a second way that it also is, there's a subsidy of the rich to the poor, is that when we go on, those that don't have rooftop solar, everyone is buying power, the utility board is buying, the utility department is buying power for everyone. We generally buy it at about 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. It varies with the years. But when someone puts rooftop on their house, we automatically have to buy it from them at 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Yet if we went elsewhere and bought it, whether we're buying the hydros, we're buying coal, unfortunately, we're buying solar from others, we're buying wind, we buy that on average at 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour, but for this subset, we're choosing to pay double that. Well, that's being paid by everyone in the community, where you could have lowered it. So once again, I started off by saying I'm extremely pro-solar. I do question that there are optimum and non-optimum ways, and my goal here is not to convince anyone of anything, but I do think the church should realize the economics are probably going to change. So let me conclude by stating where that is. We used to have a limit in the community of 2 megawatts on people's roofs. Rooftop solar was very popular in the community. I think it's because people saw it's the only way they could make a personal difference. So my goal here is not to attack people that have put it on their roofs. I think almost everyone I know who's done it has done it for a very positive reason. They want to make a difference in the community. The utility department, in my opinion, we were acting way too slowly. And so it's something you could take control over and do instantly, and so I applaud you for making those steps. But we initially had a limit of 2 megawatts because it is a little hard for the community to handle the variability of it. It was very popular, we raised it to 6. Okay, we're now at 4 megawatts on people's roofs, 1 at the landfill, so we're at near 4 to 5 as a community. We're gonna hit that 6 limit soon. I don't think we're gonna keep upping it. Just listen, as a utility board member, I listen to my other members, I think the economics will change. So my criticisms of equity, we could totally get away with by changing the rules, and this is where I'd ask you to make a separate calculation, because I think we will make those changes. So start having people that have rooftop solar pay for the grid, equally to all the others. And so that will raise the rates of those that have it on your roof. Yeah, I don't know exactly what we'll do about the displacement of buying power at 5 versus 11. Maybe that won't be handled, but there will probably be a change to make it so that you don't have the poor in our community subsidizing the richer in our community. So I would ask if you would at least make a calculation to show how that change, which I do think will be coming soon, would impact. So
I think that's
without further ado, I'd take, it's your talk, but if people want to talk to me about it, happy to give follow-up.
I really appreciate the comments, and I do think, having worked in the industry for about a decade, I've watched utilities adjust to rooftop solar. I've watched the rates and how they structure things change to kind of deal with that particular issue. We're down in central New Mexico. P&M is our major utility, and on the commercial rates, they've taken enormous changes of how they charge. So they've lowered the rate for the kilowatt hour and raised the demand. Now, demand is sort of like the size of the pipe, not the quantity of anything going through it. And so they will charge you for the highest 15 minutes of your peak usage. So if that would be 100 kilowatts of power, they would charge you for that demand. Even if you only used it for 15 minutes, they charge you for the highest 15 minutes. So then what happens is that half of your bill, over half of your bill, is now all based on demand, because they've lowered the kilowatt rate so low to discourage the financial benefits of solar. So what has changed there is where we're focusing on those particular types of accounts is that now it's battery energy, which then we're dealing with the separate thing, which is the demand. So if you have a curve of the highest thing in 15 minutes, a battery comes in and shaves off the top. Again, it becomes an economic thing. We're trying to save money and deal with it, but it doesn't necessarily address the inequality. I think that the community solar, and the hope is that will be fully subscribed. We'll help certain industries do that, but I know that the rates in all utilities have adjusted their service charge. Some places actually charge you if you have solar. You know, if you live in Farmington, you will be charged per kilowatt of what you have on your roof. So there's a variety of ways that utilities have to cover their ends because Steve is correct. We're used utility at night. The missing part of that is also that the utility does very little to move the energy around during the day because you've got rooftop solar doing it. So at my house, when I'm overproducing in the day, it hits my transformer and goes directly into my neighbor's house. And the utility did almost nothing to do that, right? And they're charging him full rate for that. So there is a load balancing thing that is beneficial and can be beneficial in some circumstances. Maybe not always here in Los Alamos, but the idea is that we can continue to work on those rates, and we need to do more community projects. Positive Energy has worked with the city of Santa Fe to try and do low-income housing projects. We've donated equipment to Habitat for Humanity. We just donate time for projects, and I do a lot of outreach with Cornerstones, which is a group in Santa Fe that try and do churches and native land type of stuff. So our approach, in the industry needs to be far broader than just selling systems. I think that's, a clear indication. Energy efficiency, any place that we go to look at solar, we will ask, what's the efficiency of this house, this building? What are the changes that can be made? On the commercial side, we do a lot of performance contracting, which is where we do a full investment grade audit on a building with another company, and they will measure how much sun is coming through the window, how tightly the building is sealed, how efficient is the HVAC, where solar only becomes one part of the solution, and maybe sometimes not even the solution. So I do appreciate the comments, and I think that's, if we're going to change the world, it's through multiple methods, not just one.
Could you comment some, Thomas, about how much maintenance will be needed and what your level of responsibility will be on that and costs in that area?
Usually, for a solar system, maintenance is doing mostly one thing, making sure that it's on, okay? Yeah, I know it's a funny thing, but that's the number one key. Is it operating? At my own house, someone had turned off a breaker to do something, and I didn't notice for a week. And then I got a bill, and I was like, where did this bill come from? And I walked down, and there was someone had turned off a breaker. So I missed the maintenance part, which was to make sure that it was actually running. All of these systems anymore have data monitoring, which means that there's a device that captures how much it's producing. And since we dial in how much we think the system is going to produce, we provide you basically a chart of what your month to month is supposed to look like. So the quick and dirty way of doing that is you look at your bill and you look at the chart. Is everything okay? Good. If not, you give me a call. Maintenance is, cleaning the modules. That could be possible. I haven't cleaned my modules in years. I don't think I ever will. Because we get these torrential rains that basically clean up all the panels, my car, everything. But I'll tell you that as part of the community, we do once you're part of the family, we kind of monitor all of the projects. We have a service team, one of the few solar companies in the state of New Mexico that has a dedicated service department, and they basically watch all the systems. And so when they get flags of something's going wrong, they'll send a message, looks like your modem isn't connected. Looks like there's a problem with an inverter. Who should I talk to about this? Because again, the worth of your system is only if it's working, if it's producing, if it's on. So my point for that would be that we would hope to install data monitoring with this system, so both the church and Positive Energy could see it, and review bills for a couple of years to make sure that everything's going as planned. Because once you get past a couple of years, usually there's very little problems after that. And we offer a 2-year workmanship on our stuff. And when I say workmanship, that's generally when hands do stuff, right? So tightening bolts, tightening wires, things of that nature. As long as we've done all that correctly, the system should work. Now, if there's a manufacturer defect, generally they'll offer you some new equipment, but they don't pay you to put it back in, right? And so that's where the solar industry is trying to work towards in terms of service. Is if there's manufacturer defects, we pay our guys to go out and take care of that, and that would be a cost to the client as usual. Similar to, if I get a new ceiling fan and something breaks with it, the electrician's going to come and take it down, but I have to pay him for that. But overall, very low maintenance. It's more monitoring than anything.
Just a quick comment about that. Our system's been, you all put on our house 11 years ago, and we've had 0 problems with it in this whole time. We have had a problem with the data transfer module. It will, or something like that. But that's the only one we've had any problem with, and it has nothing to do with the system per se.
Yeah, I find that the monitoring, much like these cell phones that we all carry along, they get outdated faster than the PV. And we run across PV solar panels that are 30, 40 years old that are still operating, but I couldn't find a phone that was that old and still operating, unless it was rotary, right? And then even then, who has a rotary line anymore? So I appreciate that point, and I think the monitoring is probably the biggest difficulty moving forward, is that the cell technology and the monitoring stuff changes over time.
Thomas, could you walk us through the process of how this will go, assuming that we elect to go with this system, the process of permitting and installation and final certification and so forth?
Sure. So typically what happens when a solar project gets contracted is that I will bring a solar designer out to look at the property, look at the plans of the roof. We find that it's important to have more than one set of eyes look at something. I am not perfect. You already heard that I went to school for art, so I'm not an engineer. So the solar designer comes out and inspects the electrical system, takes photographs, opens it up, measures everything. They look at the building plans. This building is fairly new, and I've already looked at the plans, but they will take those plans and use them as a basis for their design. Both the structural and electrical designs are then reviewed by an engineer. Once those are approved, they're brought to you all for your review and comment and question. Once we've reached consensus on the design, then we send that out to the utility, the local utility, for its interconnection application, where they study the system against their system and their structure. So they will look at the transformer that's outside and check the rating of the transformer against the aggregate size of the solar here, and the aggregate of the solar in the neighborhood, and the aggregate of all the solar in the city, as we've already heard. And they'll say yes or no, or yes if or you can downgrade it. But generally, we find that we do our research and we feel pretty confident that that part will go in. At the same time, we submit our plans to the construction industry divisions, which is the state of New Mexico, because you need an electrical inspection on the system. And once you have all of your permits and utility approvals, then it gets to scheduling. And I calculate that this system would take about 6 to 7 days for our team to do in total. And once it's installed, then an electrical inspector comes out and looks at the system from tip to tail and makes any suggestions or corrections, and we take care of those. And then they tell the utility, this system looks good. The utility comes and signs it, and turns it on. So overall, the bureaucracy part is the longest. Surprise, surprise. The hope is that Los Alamos is a lot more efficient and professional than P&M. So P&M at the moment is taking 8 to 12 weeks to review solar projects. So if you're trying to run a business, you have to have a certain amount of backlog to keep, things moving. But the whole process is fairly cut and dry.
String inverters, and I'm just wondering if you could give us a rough idea of where they would be and how many again.
So when it gets to solar systems, you have solar panels that create DC power. Then you need to convert it to AC. In this case, I found that the building has a voltage. The electrical system has a 208 voltage. So in that case, we have to use a string inverter that matches that 208 voltage. So in this case, we're looking at using 3 string inverters, and their location of where they are in the building, I don't decide. But what they do is they take a certain string, or say a group of panels, like 12 to 15, and bring them together into one electrical line that then hits the inverter, and that voltage then gets shifted and sent down line. So the solar designers will take groups of panels and group them together into a string to then feed into the inverter. And I think that they look at both the areas, so you're trying to condense the amount of wiring that you're using, and also that they have similar sort of solar access, because you don't want the voltages on the solar panels to be too varied when they're doing that. All equipment location gets reviewed by you all. So if there's a wall that we're not supposed to put something on, or if it needs to be up on the roof, it's all that sort of question comes through the design process.
Yeah. So I had your company, the Positive Energy Solar, install panels on my house, which is an older house, 1960s, out on Barranca. And I have been, the company has been just a pleasure to work with. I signed up prior to the pandemic, and then installation and through the pandemic. But you mentioned the engineering, and so when they came and reviewed my home, they pointed out you have a electrical box that's out of date, not just out of date, but red flagged and really needs to be changed. Well, I'd had remodeling and things done to it. Nobody had ever brought that up before. So added to, well, they need to get this changed. That became another project in itself. Fortunately, it tied in, and I got the tax credit on the conversion and some additional work to put in a brand new electrical box. So I wanted to bring that up, the pleasure of working with your company, the efficiency, and that has really been remarkable. So I just wanted to point that out for people. Also, a glitch that I had not thought about, but my modem went bad, had to get a new modem, and put that in, and everything was working fine, except the solar, because I had, new modem, new password, and all of a sudden, for a period of time, there's no connection. So every time I leave and I shut down my modem, I know that it's not going to be communicating, but for some period of time, I wasn't keeping on top of it and realizing there's no connection as long as there's no password. So went through, and there was a website and taught me how to reconnect that to the solar. But all of that has been, really simple and straightforward process with your company. So,
Well, we appreciate the feedback. Part of the process, because if you invite an electrical inspector to your property of any type, and if they identify anything, they have the power to tell you that you must fix it. So we like to preempt them and fix things before they get there, because then our reputation with that inspector in that jurisdiction is this company knows what they're doing, and they're worthwhile. Also, electrical safety is #1 priority. I mean, fire hazard. Like old electrical boxes have burned down houses. So it's, even if you don't go solar, sometimes we will say you still need to get that box fixed, and people have, and that it's part of caring and doing a high quality job.
From the standpoint of church's financing of this, the cost of the project is projected to be $86,000 through the generosity of several people, but most especially the McLeods. We have already $44,000 in a fund for this. With the $26,000 that we would get back from federal rebate, we're only left with about $18,000 that this project will cost. And we can either borrow that money from ourselves, we can borrow it from a local bank, or we can borrow that from Positive Energy Solar. And whatever that will cost us per year is going to be substantially less than what we're paying for electricity right now. And then once that loan is paid off, we're saving $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year for the church. So a key point here is we'd be doing the right thing in terms of our environment. We would be quickly recouping money, which would help the church financially immediately, and in the long run, there would be a huge recouping. This has nothing to do with the shortfall that we're facing in this year's budget. This is a separate fund, a separate project that will easily pay for itself and more. So if anybody sort of says, well, how can we afford that when we are having trouble figuring out how we're going to make our budget for this year, they're elephants and dogs, separate critters here.
Yeah, I also want to say that I believe Skip and Hetty also contributed to this fund and also the vision of it. I think they were longtime supporters of solar.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Skip gets great credit. Thank you, sir. Any other questions, comments? Thomas, thank you so much for coming up and doing this. We appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all for attending. I really appreciate the interaction.